Excellent, excellent. So hi, my name is James Griffin. I am CEO of Invene, and then my co-presenter is going to be Alex Tuck, managing principal of Tuck Consulting Group. Today we're going to be talking about training AI in a world of contracts, clauses, and compliance. We're going to both touch on how to do this externally with third-party vendors, how to go through the contract clauses, and also internally how to best leverage the new advancements in Gen AI. Before we really kind of talk about the tactical steps, the most important thing is let's start with a story. Let's say that you're selling to a large Fortune 100 company. You're a startup, and right now you're doing classical machine learning. You're not using anything in Gen AI. You just got a large deal, you negotiate with all the business stakeholders, and then this clause comes back here. Your blood run cold. You have no idea where this comes from, how it happened, because you've got all this business stakeholders, everyone agreed, but then in the end, you're hit with this legal clause in the MSA that they send back to you. This is a very common story where large enterprises have started to add these sort of blanket level clauses around no AI into their arsenal. It's happening as we speak, as overzealous layers are adding it to go protect their companies. And we're going to talk about actually how to solve this in a little bit. So even though I'm a software engineer by trade, I spend way too much time talking to lawyers. I've written for Bloomberg Law to actually talk about HIPAA compliance for it. And as a full-time job, I'm basically the CEO of Invene. You can kind of think of us as a full-stack engineering product firm where we help mid-market enterprise companies strategize, build, and then implement new products. As you can see on the slide are some of our past healthcare clients, where we've worked with things in the payer, provider, health tech, life science, med device space, where we're widespread across the whole healthcare industry. I also acquired a strategy and design firm a couple of weeks ago so we can better design the agentic interfaces of the future. Now to hand off to my partner, Alex.
All right. Thanks, James. Thanks for that intro. My name's Alex Tuck. I'm the managing principal of Tuck Consulting Group. We're a 60-person project management consulting firm, all US-based. Here are some of the awards we've won based on our growth trajectory and also our impact on the community. And we're technology partners in several areas, right? We're Microsoft partners from a project and portfolio management perspective. We're also HubSpot partners. And most importantly, as a project management shop, ClickUp is our go-to project management tool, although we also work with 20 plus other PM tools. But we're a top 5 ClickUp implementer here in North America. Our 4 verticals where we really focus are healthcare, nonprofit, SaaS, and professional services. And so in the healthcare context, it's probably our largest vertical. And we want to talk a little bit about how AI is impacting healthcare and how we can help you through your contracts. All right, James, you're up.
Excellent. So Tuck's group and Invene's have actually worked together on multiple healthcare deals together, and that's kind of how we know each other, and that's why we're co-presenting here. So overall, for a concept, is that AI isn't really new. At a high level, and don't quote me on this, but AI was basically coined in 1956 by the Dartmouth Conference, but it really kind of took off commercially, let's say in the 2010s with cloud, big data, GPUs, all that proliferation. And then by the late 2010s, it became very common in things as you see on the slides, such as recommendation engines, fraud detection, diagnostics. Now, Gen AI is new though, overall here. You can think of Gen AI as kind of like a model that generates new content, text, images, code. For context of how new this is, it's only around 3 years because ChatGPT launched in about November 2020 with GPT 3.5 that hit 100 million users in months, which is one of the fastest product growths within history. The key thing you can know about Gen AI is a lot of the outputs are basically kind of like human-like and more conversational in nature. And as you kind of put it as a subset, it's always important to note Gen AI is a subset of AI. So basically, Gen AI high level is using the transformers that was created in 2017 by Google, where you're pre-training on massive data sets. Gen AI is basically AI, but doing a better job of taking unstructured data and converting it to structured data. Now, an important thing to note is that AI umbrella term, ML, computer vision, NLP, reinforcement learning, while Gen AI is just one subset of that. That's more of, let's say, things like LLMs, large language models, which is something like ChatGPT, or diffusion models to go create images. As I mentioned on a previous slide, Gen AI makes certain tasks very, very easy that were traditionally very difficult in the past with traditional machine learning and AI techniques. So, for example, taking natural language summaries from structured text, something like in healthcare, where the ambient clinical listening providers like Abridge, Camur, DeepScribe, OnPoint Iris, where you basically take that clinical SOAP note, all that unstructured data of the provider's encounter, and convert that into a SOAP clinical note that can be entered in their EMR. That is now much simpler with Gen AI and LLMs. They can also be used for things such as rapid content generation, such as emails, reports, responses. And they're also really good about co-pilots for things like customer support, legal drafting, research, really making it much easier to generate content here. Obviously, it's called generative AI, so it makes sense that way. Now, an important thing, a context to know that kind of answers the beginning question is how an LLM is trained. So you can kind of basically think of it as there's this massive corpus of text, web, books, code, and it's like learning how to predict the next word in the context based on based on all this past content here. You can kind of think of it as a token predictor. Now, it usually costs millions to hundreds of millions, weeks to months. You can kind of see over time the increase in parameters here. Now, who actually fine tunes it here? So, open source LLMs, you can kind of think of it as that you fine tune it. So, something like Llama or Mistral, you actually fine tune it. While proprietary, the corporate owner fine tunes it. That's something like GPT-4 and Claude. When you fine tune the open source, you kind of get full control, but it's a lot more effort. And I added a little asterisk there that usually the corporate owner, there is select things like, let's say you're in Snowflake with OpenAI, there's actually ways at enterprise level customers that you can actually have access to fine tune it. But traditionally, most people using proprietary models aren't fine tuning it. Now, just to level set a couple of terminology, so I explain the difference, and this is very key because whenever you're negotiating with legal, you have to have a strong understanding of the technical concepts to really help educate them. So high level prompts are like the instructions. You see an example of a prompt there, and it's similar to what everyone's done whenever they've acted with an LLM here. Inference is actually the work that is happening. You can kind of think of it as the output of the prompt itself. The third thing is the context window, where this is the memory. As you can see over time, it's up and to the right. You can kind of think of this as how much the model can see overall. For example, I think like in GPT-4 Turbo, it was like 300 pages, which was like 130K tokens overall. And as you can see, the vision is, okay, how do we have more and more context window over time? When you exceed the context window, certain input is dropped, basically. You can also think about it, at least traditionally, and this is changing over time, more tokens is like more memory, but also higher cost and then slower performance overall. And what you do, because a token is limited here, you use something such as a RAG, which you can kind of think of it as an internal search engine using a vector database. A vector database basically uses semantic search instead of keyword search. That way it's retrieving information based on meaning instead of just like exact word matchings. And it does this via the vector embeddings where the vector database come from. Embeddings basically turn text into math, where it becomes this numerical vector that captures a semantic meaning. This keeps the model much more lightweight. Instead of having to fine tune the model with private knowledge, you use RAG as kind of an external retrieval, meaning that you don't actually have to retrain. So a lot of times when people talk about, hey, look, I'm fine tuning my model, a lot of times what they're actually doing is they're using retrieval augmented generation. They're basically using RAG and they're actually pulling the information into the corpus of text. For example, if you have lots of PDFs, you usually put them in a vector database so that LLM can more easily access that content. One thing that is very clear though, LLMs do not learn. That is a myth. Every prompt is a stateless transaction unless memory is explicitly enabled. There is no model updates during the inference, as I shown below. The model does not improve the more you use it, which is a common C-suite myth. However, machine learning can learn. So basically, traditional machine learning works by patterns where you update the model weights with the new labeled data. For example, if you feed 10,000 patient records, you could improve the readmission prediction rate here. LLMs improve specifically via retraining. These require new runs, which are usually costly, to improve the core behavior. So you can improve LLMs via pre-training data, RLHF, reinforcement learning with human feedback, or like fine-tuning on specific use cases. Just to reiterate, user prompts alone don't improve the base model here. Now, the confusing part that to some people is actually OpenAI does collect some prompts by default overall here, basically. And you can actually turn this off in the settings there, as you see here. It's basically under settings, data controls, and then you can improve the model, and then you can turn that off. And that ChatGPT team, enterprise, and API users are basically excluded from this. But if you're on a pro or a basic setting, you're still on it here. And then OpenAI basically uses the data as kind of the corporate owner to fine tune their LLM here. It's why LLMs right now sound like helpful assistants. They actually fine tune to actually have that result and that kind of feeling towards the users. Unlike prompting, fine tuning changes the model weights, making the adjustment permanent and persistent here. And fine tuning really requires training data to make sure that you actually have the correct input output pairs. And then, as noted previously, you could actually fine tune GPT 3.5 Turbo via their own API. So there's all these different mechanisms they can kind of tackle it. Now I'm going to hand it off to Tuck here.
All righty. So hopefully you all get a little break from the fire hose of technical terms that James just threw at you. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the functional things that we should be thinking about. So I'm probably talking more to the lawyers and the PMs and the BAs out there, right? But this is about staying safe on your AI journey, right? And there's three internal guardrails that you can put in place at your organization if you don't already have them in place, or you can even improve them a little bit. Hopefully we give you a few tips here. But first thing is you all probably have an acceptable use policy at your organization if you're a healthcare firm, obviously. But some of you might only have a line in there that says, "Hey, you can only use AI for this, or you can't use AI at all for any of the work." We're going to talk about some of the things that you can add to an AI acceptable use policy to protect your organization and your clients' data as well. The second thing that we'll talk about is your prompt library. A lot of folks don't have a central repository where they're sharing all the prompts, all the hard work that they're doing and all the great results they're getting from all the different prompting that they're doing. They're not sharing that or even recording it for themselves to use in the future. So we'll talk a little bit about some tips there for prompt libraries and the value there. And then also we'll talk about logging and how that can protect your organization and or expose your organization's data and your clients' data. So let's hop into each one. All right. So the first one, building an AI policy that works for you. Different schools of thought. Some people say, hey, embed your AI policy within your AUP. Other folks say, hey, have a separate AI acceptable use policy. Regardless, have one, build one, and continuously update it. The thing about AI AUPs is that they have to be updated all the time, right? Because there's constantly like new apps that have AI features, new apps that developers want to try and PMs want to try. There's new LLMs that you might want to try to deploy within the organization. So just make sure that within your acceptable use policy for AI, that you're defining, what LLMs are in scope, which ones are allowed, and then also which ones aren't allowed, and then which apps do you have that are deployed across the organization that are allowed. I can guarantee you that there are people in your organization, if you're big enough, that are using ChatGPT with company data and you don't know about it. There's so much shadow IT with this. And if you don't give them the tools to be able to use AI, they're going to figure out a way to make their jobs easier by using these other tools. So let's just tell your team, what you can and what you can't use. That's the first thing. Second thing is assign categories within that AEP. Like try to figure out how much detail you want to have. I love use cases, right? So putting use cases in AEPs is like a foolproof way to figure out, to guide folks on, what's acceptable and what's not. So thinking about like, okay, marketing team, yes, you are allowed to use ChatGPT as long as you don't put client data in here. And then which model types are allowed, like can you use open source or is it all, do you have some proprietary mix, right? And then also like what level of data sensitivity are each of the data sets, and define that there. And then finally, have an approval process, define what that approval process is. Someone finds a new tool, they send it to this person or this group and get that approved. All right, prompt libraries. Biggest thing, it saves time, saves money. Behind that, it reduces errors, right? If you have your prompts, then it's a lot easier to make sure that when you hire a new developer and they are building user stories using prompts, that they're using the right prompts to get the right user stories, so they're building the right data set and the right code. It also is easy to upskill and onboard faster. So let's say you have a new BA that's there and they need to add things to the backlog. If you give them the proper prompt library, that you can fast forward their learning significantly and have them add value within the organization much quicker. It also speeds up audits and shows to customers and regulators, hey, we have our stuff together. All of our folks are trained this way. They're using these types of prompts. And you can trust this with your client's data. And then finally, just like you do with data, just make sure you're tagging your everything in your prompt library. So this thing is customer facing. This thing has client data. This prompt is only for internal use. This prompt is pending legal reviews, so don't use it yet. So there's different types of different ways to tag, just like you do with data. You can tag your prompts as well. All right. And then finally, let's talk about data, right? So I just mentioned it. Data tags are very, very helpful in general. It's the hardest thing to get anyone to do. Everyone has been asked to like label your SharePoint data, every single document, so that it has a certain data tag, and no one does that. But it's really, really important to label like folders and things like that with data tags that say like, hey, okay, this is allowed for training. This is for inference only. This one is completely blocked. This one is under legal review, et cetera. Right. So just using data tags to let everyone know, and potentially even using code to like block people from even accessing that to begin with. Speaking of blocking access, using role-based access control is a great way to prevent accidents from happening. So just making sure that only the approved employees have access to certain types of data will prevent breaches and incidental breaches, unintentional breaches in contracts. And finally, logs, right? Like there's so much good logging. Think about like Microsoft Purview and stuff like that. It's great to track who has access to that sensitive data and who accidentally pulled it, who did it on purpose, et cetera. All of that's great. We'll talk about it in a few, about how it can also incidentally expose client data if you're logging not the proper way. So, all right, back to you, James.
Excellent. So let's say, for example, that you did want to go have your own proprietary LLM. Where do you find it? Really, the go-to place, which is like the GitHub of open source models, is Hugging Face. It is overall the MVP here. Basically, you can find big open source models like Llama, Mistral, DeepSeek, and hundreds of thousands of other ones here. Now, where do you deploy it? Basically, any major cloud here can actually go have it happen. As you can see, Microsoft Azure, you could use their Azure OpenAI service. You could actually use the regular Microsoft Azure ML factory. Amazon, you could go use SageMaker. Google, you could use Vertex Cloud. Oracle has their own version. Everyone has a place where you can actually go deploy your open source model. Now, which one should you pick here? There's tons overall. There's like, as mentioned, there's Mistral, which is Mistral 7B, Mistral 8X7B. You basically have like older models, you have newer models. A lot of times what I end up suggesting is just take the latest Llama model, because Facebook is always working on trying to improve the latest and greatest model. So usually safest bet, if you did want to use an open source model, usually just go with Llama here. One thing to call out that is a common misconception is everyone thinks, oh, DeepSeek is going to go steal my data if I use it. Not if you use an open source model. An open source model is just parameters. You can host on your own infrastructure, and then you can air gap it. One thing to call out, though, let's say that you did use DeepSeek on, let's say, their web app, then it may potentially go, let's say, to the holders, the Chinese government of DeepSeek overall here. But if you're hosting it on your own environment, any open source, it cannot get back to the corporate owner here, which is kind of a very clear indication and separation here. So don't, even if you're in a secure environment, you could use DeepSeek if you use the open source version and you completely air gap your environment here overall here. Now, just to be clear, what happens is that self-hosted means private. And this is very clear, which is misunderstanding. Basically, no external API calls are happening in the DeepSeek example. This basically stops any vendor collection at all. So any open source model, you're good as long as you host it in your own environment here. And they can basically run in your isolated VMs. They can run on your on-prem GPUs. You have all sorts of options available to you around logs, access, memory, retention. The world is your oyster here. And just as a call out is that it is very easy. By default, you get a BAA with Azure already, and then AWS, they support BAAs. That way you can even do it in a HIPAA compliant manner overall here.
All right, cool. And so now we talked about open source. Here's where we get a little bit more expensive, but it gives you that security that you need, right? If you want to use a COTS product and you just want to hit the ground running right away. Obviously, big players out there: Microsoft, OpenAI, Amazon Bedrock using Anthropic. Like there's a lot of open source big players that you are familiar with, and then some of you who have started adopting AI internally at your healthcare organization. Maybe using a bridge or one of these other industry specific tools. But either way, big difference is that COTS is going to sort of be one step ahead, going to help you deploy a little bit quicker if you haven't done it before. And it's going to be a little bit more expensive to have those frameworks already set up for you. All right. But when you use COTS, you have to think about things like, how does this impact vendor agreements, right? Because you have a lot more control over what you're deploying if you're using open source. However, if you're using COTS, you're going to have to go through the T&Cs of the COTS vendor agreements to figure out how they're using stuff and making sure that you're not that you are actually in compliance with what your clients need. So anyway, James and I, we're not attorneys. We're not giving you legal advice here. So please talk to your attorney. Make sure they're checking your client agreements and your vendor agreements for compliance all the time. But these are some helpful hints about things that you can approach, ways you can think about vendor agreements. One, do they offer BAAs? Almost all the big ones do, and also all the healthcare ones do. But just double check. Sometimes you'll get the gotcha of, oh shoot, you need to be at a certain license level, or you have to have a minimum spend, limited number of tokens, things like that. So just be careful when you start to go down the path of adoption that you can get a BAA at the license level that you're trying to pursue. Do they explicitly state that they don't train on your data? Make sure that happens, or there's a way to opt out. And then also, even of course, they're going to have some sort of logs, but do they store those logs? And and how are they using that data? Just make sure that you check those vendor agreements. Figure out when and how they are using your data to train, if they are using your data to train. So almost all of the COTS tools have certain endpoints that train and certain endpoints that don't train. Make sure that you're using the endpoints that don't train if you're not supposed to be training the model. Make sure you understand the settings to opt out. James showed you how to do it in ChatGPT. Almost all of the tools out there have something like that where you can opt out. And unfortunately, a lot of the tools have you opt in by default. right? Because they're trying to train their models. So make sure that you figure out how to opt out when you can. And this is just a hint. Tools will split things into the data usage policy and the API T&Cs. So make sure that you're reviewing both of them and looking for the same thing, same gotchas in both of those areas. All right, back to you, James.
Excellent. So let's kind of ask how to resolve this. So obviously, as you can see here, this shows a large lack of understanding here, especially with an AI system. So whenever you see a large phrase like this in a legal contract, you really have to ask yourself, what are they worried about here? Basically, they're asking themselves a couple of common questions. Uh, will our data be used to train a model? Could our data leak into a commercial model? Could our data leak into another one of your clients? Is this HIPAA compliant? That's always the easiest one to solve. Hey, look, we have a BAA, easy. So, for example, you can change it around to kind of really tie it into the specific use case that they're kind of worried on. This one, they're really worried about fine tuning and getting back to a large corporate player like OpenAI. So then you add language around it such that you can fine tune with their existing data to fine tune your model for them to better serve them, which is probably what you actually negotiated with the legal person. So, really, whenever you're trying to negotiate with legal, it's critical that you align with the business stakeholder to make sure that they understand the business need. You align with the technical stakeholder so they understand the technical need, and then you double tap them both with your technical and business stakeholder to really go to legal, and you work as a team here to go get this clause rewritten, because by default they throw this in, and then your goal is overall, don't panic, work with your technical and business stakeholder to push back. You may have to educate the legal department around, hey, look, this is actually not what it should be, and you should really be thinking ahead overall here and have clear use on what you're actually going to be doing with the data. No longer can you get around with your contract provisions of, oh yeah, we're going to write it in a way to like get all their data and no one will know. Lawyers are trained on that now. Now you have to have very honest conversations, work with your business and technical stakeholders to push it forward here.
Awesome. Cool. So we're almost running up on time. I want to get one question in if possible, but here's some practical next steps, right? First, make sure if you don't have it, add Gen AI to your acceptable use policy or draft a separate one. Second, educate, train, take some time to train your team on the tools that are approved, AI terminology and data sets. You can honestly, like James did an awesome job of describing AI 101, like share that, share this recording afterwards. And the final thing is sort of, I mean, it's something that we do as a project management company. And I think definitely like technical teams should do this, hosting a promptathon just to see how you can use different tools that are approved, test out the tools and try to learn how to best leverage different tools and leverage different prompts to add to that prompt library that's out there. So anyway, we're James and Alex. Here are our LinkedIn connection. You can also just search for both of us, James J. Griffin and Alex Tuck. Please connect with us on LinkedIn. Ask us any questions. I'd love to just ask one or get one of these questions in. James,
Yeah.
what's a good first step for a health tech company that's just starting to think about AI data governance?
Basically what you do, go into ChatGPT, literally ask it, what should your policy be? And ask it to basically have the top 3 steps and start there. That's really the greatest benefit. What I'd really say is that if you're a health tech company, make sure you have BAAs with all your vendors. Basically, make sure everything that is touching is BAA. Make sure whatever LLM that you're using here does not train on your data, because that will cause a lot of problems down the road, especially as they're starting to figure out ways to attack LLMs. And similar to, SQL injection queries, there's LLM injection where they could actually pull out some of the training data potentially. So there's all these issues. That's what I'd really say here is those key BAAs and really driving it forward.
Awesome. James, thanks so much. It's been fun. We ran through a bunch of content. Everyone connect with us and post some comments afterwards on this LinkedIn Live, and we'll respond to those as we go through the week. All right. Thanks everyone for listening in.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye.